You weren't born hiding your needs. That came later. It came when you realized certain truths were met with silence, when you noticed that being agreeable earned fewer consequences, when the cost of being honest felt too high to risk. So you adjusted. You learned to read the room before you spoke. You started weighing your words, measuring your tone, offering what felt safest rather than what felt true. They called it maturity, but deep down, you felt like you were disappearing. What no one told you was that this disappearance doesn't look like pain on the surface, but it leaves you with questions you don't say out loud. Carl Jung had a name for this quiet self-editing. He didn't see it as humility. He saw it as survival. And behind it, a mask formed not out of vanity, but necessity. You wear it so long it feels like skin. And when you finally peel it off, the air feels unfamiliar. This isn't a call to become loud. It's a call to become visible, not by force, but by no longer disappearing on command. In this video, we'll explore how that mask is built, why it feels safer than the truth, and what begins to change the moment you stop letting people mistake your silence for peace. 1. Stop confusing niceness with safety. Why we keep agreeing even when we don't mean it. There's a difference between being good and being pleasing. You probably weren't taught that. Most of us grew up thinking that to be accepted, we had to be easy to digest. We weren't taught to connect. We were taught to comply. And so, when faced with tension, we soften. When there's discomfort, we smooth it over. Not because we want peace, but because we're afraid of what honesty might break. You don't just want to be liked, you want to be safe. But somewhere along the line, you equated the two. And that's the trap. You assume if you're likable, you won't be left. If you're agreeable, you won't be hurt. But protection built on pretense doesn't protect anything. It only delays the damage. In trauma psychology, there's a term for this: the fawn response. It's a survival mechanism where instead of fighting or fleeing, you appease. You adapt your tone. You study faces. You keep the temperature of the room under control because the cost of conflict feels existential. It starts in childhood, but it doesn't stay there. Fawners grow into adults who over-apologize, over-accommodate, and overextend. Not because they're kind, because they've been conditioned to treat every no like a threat to their existence. And in that conditioning, the real you is pushed further out of view. Even celebrities known for generosity like Robin Williams struggled with this dynamic. He once said, "I think the saddest people always try their hardest to make people happy because they know what it feels like to feel absolutely worthless." His charm wasn't just performance, it was protection. But the cost of always being on is that no one knows what off looks like. Even you forget. You're not here to be nice, you're here to be whole. 2. Unmask the persona before it replaces you. Why people think they know you, but they don't? Think about how you introduce yourself, your job, your role, your relationship status. None of it is really you, but it's what people accept. Carl Jung called this the persona, a crafted mask that makes you acceptable to society. It's not deception, it's adaptation. But the problem arises when the mask stops being a tool and starts being your identity. You become the dependable one, the nice one, the calm one. Not because you always feel that way, but because it's easier than explaining when you don't. Over time, the lines blur. You forget where the role ends and you begin. Most personas are built early, not by choice, but by necessity. You learned which emotions earned attention, which traits got praised, which parts of you made people uncomfortable. So you started editing, not to manipulate, to survive. You became flexible, predictable, palatable. But that flexibility had a price. You stopped showing up as yourself. And now people love a version of you that was never real to begin with. Ever been the one everyone leans on but no one checks in on? That's the mask working overtime. People assume you're okay because you never break, you never show the wear and tear. But being composed isn't the same as being connected. and always being the strong one can become a lonely performance. If your presence requires a persona, you're not really present. 3. Conflict isn't cruel. Why avoiding confrontation erodes your sense of self? There's a lie most people-pleasers carry, that peace means keeping everyone comfortable. But that's not peace. That's emotional labor. Real peace doesn't ask you to contort. It doesn't require silence as payment. It makes room for truth, for contrast, for disagreement. If every no feels like a risk, you're not in a relationship. You're in a negotiation. Avoiding conflict isn't a personality trait. It's often a learned response to unsafe dynamics. If growing up, disagreement led to punishment or withdrawal, then confrontation didn't just feel uncomfortable, it felt dangerous. So now even small tensions make your heart race. You feel guilt before you even speak. You try to say things nicely, but end up not saying them at all. And the people around you? They never see your edges. They just see your accommodation and take it as consent. In professional settings, the cost of being agreeable is even higher. Employees who never push back are praised until burnout hits. Managers assume you're fine with the workload. Colleagues rely on your yeses. But when you finally break, they're confused. They say, "Why didn't you just say something?" And they mean it, because you trained them not to expect a boundary. Avoiding conflict isn't kindness, it's erasure in slow motion. 4. Boundaries are windows. Why protecting yourself feels like punishment to others. You finally said no. It wasn't rude, it wasn't dramatic, it was just honest. And suddenly, you're the villain. They say you've changed. They accuse you of being selfish, of being cold. But the truth is, they just met the version of you that stopped shrinking. Setting boundaries doesn't damage relationships. It only reveals the ones that were built on imbalance. When you've spent years saying yes, your first few no responses feel violent. Not to others, but to yourself. Because deep down, you were taught that love means access, that kindness means availability, that if someone needs you, you must show up, no matter the cost. So when you start protecting your time, your energy, your peace, it feels wrong, but it isn't. It's correction, a recalibration of self-respect. In family systems, boundary setting can be especially complex. You might be the one who always answers the call, solves the crisis, holds everything together. But the moment you pull back, tension surfaces. Not because you've done harm, but because your constant giving became the expectation. They're not mad you said no. They're confused you ever could. A boundary isn't rejection, it's revelation. 5. Disappointment is not a moral failure. Why letting others down is sometimes the healthiest thing you can do. You won't get out of this life without disappointing people. The question is, will you disappoint them by being true or disappoint yourself by staying small? People pleasers carry an invisible weight, the pressure to keep everyone happy, no matter the personal cost. But that pressure was never yours to hold. You're not responsible for managing everyone else's emotional comfort. You're responsible for your own alignment. Many people pleasers confuse emotional responsibility with empathy. They believe that if someone feels upset, it must be their fault. So they over-explain. They apologize too much. They water down truth to avoid being misunderstood. But protecting someone's feelings is not the same as betraying your own. You're not cruel for saying something someone doesn't like. You're dishonest if you hide it just to avoid tension. Consider strong leaders, those who command respect. They don't apologize for disappointing. They communicate expectations with firmness, not guilt. True leadership, personal or professional, requires the ability to be misunderstood without collapsing. Disappointment isn't failure. It's friction that reveals where your truth begins and someone else's ends. You can disappoint someone and still be a good person. 6. Resentment is a symptom, not a character flaw. Why your bitterness is telling you something useful. You didn't used to feel this way. You used to say yes and smile while doing it, but lately, something feels tight, office heavy. That's not a sign you're ungrateful. That's the body's way of alerting you to a boundary you've ignored too many times. Resentment isn't pettiness. It's the echo of your own silence. Emotions don't always show up as clarity. Sometimes they disguise themselves in fatigue, irritability, or indifference. But when you start resenting people, that's not about them. It's about the version of you that keeps showing up in rooms your truth would rather leave. You don't feel bitter because you helped. You feel bitter because you helped at the expense of yourself. That bitterness isn't cruelty. It's an alarm. In many relationships, one person does the emotional labor, apologizes first, plans everything, accommodates every shift in tone. At first, it feels generous. Later, it starts to feel like a transaction, except you're the only one paying. This isn't about blame. It's about noticing when the scale has been tipped too long in one direction, and that's the beginning of truth. Bitterness is the residue of needs left unspoken. 7. Stop performing for love. Why your worth isn't up for negotiation. You say the right thing. You stay quiet when it gets tense. You shift your tone so they don't take it the wrong way. And somewhere in all that choreography, you disappear. Performing is exhausting because it's endless. You never know if people love you or just the version of you they've learned to expect. So you keep managing, adjusting, softening. But the longer you do it, the more disconnected you become. Not just from others, but from yourself. Carl Jung believed that the path to wholeness was individuation, the process of becoming distinct, integrated, real. Not because it's easy, but because every time you suppress your authenticity to be accepted, a part of you goes into hiding. And over time, those hidden parts, your anger, your boundaries, your truth, start knocking. Not because they're dangerous, because they're you. Online, performance is currency. We filter, edit, posture, brand ourselves as palatable. But even offline, the performance continues. We say we're fine when we're not. We accept invitations we dread. We laugh at things that don't feel funny, and then wonder why connection feels hollow. It's because no one can love you if you're not there. You don't need to be loved by everyone, just by those who can see you. You tried to hold everything together by staying small, and it worked for a while. People liked you, they counted on your reliability, they admired your patience. But admiration isn't the same as intimacy, and being counted on isn't the same as being understood. You thought being easy to love meant being quiet about what hurt, but the silence only grew heavier. What you called peace was often just postponed discomfort. What looked like resilience was actually tension held too long. Now you see it. Every time you softened your response, it wasn't compassion, it was fear. Every time you said, "It's fine," something underneath knew it wasn't. This is where it shifts, not by demanding anything from others, but by no longer making yourself an offering. Boundaries don't end relationships. Pretending to be someone you're not does. Carl Jung understood that wholeness isn't created in comfort. It's shaped in those quiet moments when you decide not to betray yourself again. You're not abandoning kindness. You're redefining it, without the requirement to disappear in the process.